Good evening from the capital city of Prague, and welcome to the Bohemican Podcast. I'm your host, Pete Coleman.
And I'm Travis Dow from the History of Alchemy podcast.
You know, Travis, we have a special endeavor tonight as we will simulcast our audio podcast with our first ever YouTube efforts on our new Bohemican Podcast channel. On tonight's Bohemican Podcast, we will take a look at something that's near and dear to both our hearts, and that would be the very unique relationship the city of Prague has with the study and practice of alchemy. So, Travis, you are the host of the History of Alchemy podcast, and I know that this topic is exactly right in your wheelhouse. So, when we talk about alchemical biographies, what are we going to be focusing on tonight with these topics?
Well, Pete, first of all, what's a simulcast?
That's a great question, and we're going to try to get through that tonight as we're going to be
simultaneous podcast.
Simultaneous podcasting.
Is that a thing? Did you just?
If it's not, we just made it up.
Oh, okay, just checking.
Yeah, we're going to try this out, and we're going to kind of venture into the YouTube universe as well as what we do with our audio podcast that you can find on iTunes as well as our Bohemican.com website.
It's simultaneously a YouTube and a podcast, and it's simultaneously my podcast and your podcast.
Exactly, and it'll be a challenge to edit. So even better,
that's
it's all
great.
happening at once.
Okay. So there is obviously a huge overlap between the Bohemican Podcast and the History of Alchemy podcast, because the reason I started finding alchemy interesting in the first place was because I live in Prague, and Prague has, especially in the golden age of alchemy, it does have a huge connection to alchemy. I wrote some names up here on the screen here, which. So first of all, there's Rudolf II, who we did a show on, but we kind of make a joke out of. We mention him just about every episode
as a drinking game, almost.
And even when we don't think we're going to, somehow he comes up, and that is because he created the environment in Prague. He was just very kind of, I don't know, understanding is the right word, but very tolerant and allowed Protestants to thrive here, even though he was Catholic himself. And, it's right just maybe 20, 30 years before the 30 Years' War. So that did not happen everywhere in Europe.
No, he was actually known as the Mad Alchemist because of his patronage.
He was an alchemist himself.
Exactly. Yeah. And to give you a time frame about when he was around, especially here later in his life in Prague.
Like basically, what do we mean by Golden Age?
Right? Yeah, we're talking. Well, he was born in 1552 and died in 1612.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good spectrum of when, especially towards the turning of the 17th century. Prague became a very inviting city, where if you were an alchemist, you were considered pretty much a sorcerer, maybe burned at the stake.
Yeah.
Prague allowed you to come here and do your work.
It wasn't just Protestants that came here. Like, Johannes Kepler came to Prague specifically because he was a Protestant and he was having issues in Austria. And then we also see physicians coming here because one of the very first public autopsies was done in Prague, and that's again under Rudolf II. He encouraged experimentation and science to flourish, and he was really interested in gadgets and doodads, and just a really kind of curious kind of guy, also in the occult. And one thing he definitely liked was alchemy, and he invited all the alchemists to Prague. A lot of Europe, it wasn't safe for a lot of alchemists in a lot of parts of Europe. And it was outright banned places, death sentence in places, where in Prague, if you wanted to practice alchemy, you could come here. You could probably, potentially have patronage by the emperor. There was definitely other noblemen and nobility that was, looking for the Philosopher's Stone, and you could get patronage from them. So that's. I mean, the other four guys on this list were basically from Rudolf's court at one point or another. Tycho Brahe, the famous astronomer and astrologer, John Dee, the famous mathematician and also alchemist, Michael Senzivoy, who was the court alchemist, and then also Cornelis Drebbel, who was court alchemist, but also Rudolf brought him here because he had a perpetual motion machine that he first created for James I of England, or James IV of Scotland. And so all these people kind of garnered his attention and woke his curiosity, and so he Rudolf II brought them to Prague, and it is, just that list is an interesting bunch. We could have made it a lot longer.
If you do have a hankering for more information on alchemy and the history of alchemy, please go to the podcast that Travis does and that I help out with as his co-host, and you can find those links on Bohemican.com, or just go directly to iTunes. You can just download for free all those episodes. And
I
so,
believe on YouTube there will be a link somewhere
yes,
here.
and actually
or
that's
here.
amazing. And this means nothing to our audio listeners, but as we're going through the program today, we're going to be showing some cutaways of some of these folks, some pictures and some scenes of Prague that either I've taken pictures of or we have stuff that we found on the internet to kind of give you a better idea of what we're talking about.
If you're listening this on the History of Alchemy or Bohemican Podcast, hit pause, go to YouTube, find this. What's it going to be called on YouTube? Alchemy in Prague? Something like that?
Yeah, Prague's Alchemists, I think is what we're going to title this program tonight.
Yeah, you'll find it there, or go to Bohemican or historyofalchemy.com, and there'll be a link to it. I would say we had YouTube in mind for this, so obviously we'll put this on the podcast feeds, but yeah, take a look at YouTube.
No, before we get into some of the biographies that is really interesting, Travis, you and I have kind of ventured around through the city streets of Prague. You've been here 10 years. I've been here 3 years as both American expats living in Prague. Prague had that initial sort of almost punch in your mouth as far as how amazing this place is when you first see it. The architecture, the stories, the legends, the histories, just the overall feeling. Just walking out at midnight or in the middle of the evening, and when the streets are all clear to the tourists, and you have the city streets to yourself, and that kind of thin level of fog and darkness mixed together with the city lampposts.
Eerie sort of occulty vibe. Yeah.
You really feel that you're right in the middle of something pretty dark and chilling. And it is a neat sort of place to kind of explore. And we're going to do the course of this program today. We're going to take you on a little bit of a field trip. We're going to go down to Prague 1 near Old Town. And we're going to go to the second oldest building in all of Prague. That was built in, as far as the records we have, built in 980. And so the city is built up around it on what was once called the Great Via, the Great Road that connected the Orients, or the merchants of the Orient, through Prague all the way to Madrid. Went right by the front door. So it was a perfect place for an alchemist lab, right? And we're going to actually take our viewers down there to see what the catacombs are like. Hopefully, if we can get in. That's that's the thing. We're going to be doing this a little bit. We're doing this tonight on a Friday night. We're going to be doing this on Saturday. So we're going to see what we can do as far as getting some video on this. And I'm going to send you down the catacombs, and I'm going to stay up and do some interviews.
Great. Thanks.
All right? So if you make it, fantastic.
You might never see me again.
So for our listeners on Bohemican.com or on iTunes, what we will do with this is that I will have an audio interview, and we'll be mixing it all together. So I think everybody will be happy with this. But the place we're going to be looking at is the Speculum Alchemia, Prague. There are several museums on alchemy in Prague and several across the Czech Republic. There's one that's in Lesser Town that is kind of nice. It's on a touristy path, and it also has an accompaniment with a little bit of the legends and magic of Prague. So I don't want to say it's a little bit more kitschy. I think some of these museums have a tendency to be kitschy and cater towards tourism, but there's always some amazing things that people have done with them.
All right, so now we trek down to Old Town, and it's a beautiful, warm, toasty day. And so Old Town Square is right over this way, and right over here on the other side, one thing that you need to know is that all of this used to be at least 1 story low, all the way from here to the river. And then because of flooding, they raised the whole city up a level, and up to 5 meters in some places, so significantly. So all of Old Town actually has a labyrinth of a city beneath our feet. And right over here, that's the Speculum Alcomate Museum that we're about to go down. In 2002, there was a record-breaking flood, and the sinkhole kind of opened. And when they went down and kind of poked around to see what was down there, obviously they found part of the underground. And specifically, they started to find things like alembics and retorts and all these nice little alchemical vessels that we always talk about. And so we're going to go in there and go check it out.
Are you scared?
It's going to be dark and freezing, and it's haunted by greedy alchemists. So maybe a little.
So I'm going to actually stay up on the top, and I'm sending you down below.
Yeah, that's what friends are for.
I'll pay for your entry fee.
Well, you better, because it might be the last thing you ever do for me. The road, this road here, was one of the great vias, one of the big kind of trade networked, big roads between major cities, kind of east-west, north-south. This was one of the hubs there. So this is actually it. This goes, through Old Town. The other way goes over a bridge. So pretty neat little, that was just a little quaint cobblestone road, but back then, yeah, super highway.
The empire in those days, and he was very interested in alchemy and occultism and in art too, and so he invited many artists and scientists to Prague. And
Barbara was talking to us about the floods in 2002 that opened up collapsed a hole into the ground where there once was a tunnel that led to this alchemy area here, and maybe you could talk to us about that.
Okay, so in 2002, during the floods in Prague, when it was really a big flood and many animals from the zoo were swimming in it, so on the little square where the house stays, there was suddenly a hole, and the hole was caused by a secret tunnel which led to the Old Town Square and which have collapsed caused by the water.
Now, you told me there was possibly 3 tunnels that led to different locations in the city. Was that somewhat common, and where did the tunnels go?
Well, one tunnel led to the Old Town Square. The second one led to the Prague Castle. You also see the tunnel in the museum downstairs. And the third tunnel led to the Powder Tower, which is on the Náměstí Republiky. And this tunnel is under the ground, so it's not to be seen, but it should be there.
Should be, okay. What some type of artifacts were found in this collapsed tunnel that gave the idea that there was an alchemist lab here?
Well, there were the furnaces at first, and we also found some gold pieces in here, and also we found the recipes for the elixirs and also some of the elixirs.
One of the interesting stories that you mentioned before was that this is on a Grand Via, a transportation road that connected maybe people here, that merchants and whatnot, coming to the Ungelt, and then moving on to the rest of part of Europe. Was that important for this particular house? And why would that be important maybe to an alchemist to have this location?
Well, this house served as a hostel, yeah. So people who traveled through Grand Via could have a rest here. And for the alchemist it was important because people from Grand Via came from all over the world and brought many things like, crocodiles, which you can't get here.
Now, one of the really cool artifacts on the way out of the tour today was one of the original bottles of elixir that was left from this collapsed tunnel. What was that elixir again?
It's the elixir of eternal youth. But there were many of the bottles, but most of them were broken, and the scientists also needed them for the test, so this is one of the bottles which remained.
Thank you very much for your time today. We really enjoyed the tour.
Thank you.
Great. Completed. So tell us a bit about what you saw downstairs.
So it's a pretty neat place. It looks like they had their main room for distillation. It was kind of a cone-shaped stove with kind of shelves on it, so like a step pyramid sort of, and all these, alembics or retorts or whatever they were, just bunches of them on there, so that you have this kind of distillation going on in cycles. And then there was another room with a furnace for blowing the glass and creating the glass vessels they needed. And then there was another room that was more for maybe like working the metal. This was a transmutation room, is what she called it. And in that room they even found little pieces of gold. And of course, in the tour they said, well, we don't know if it's alchemist gold or what it is, but probably it could be gold for comparison. So if they do create something, that they have something real to compare it to see how close it gets, or it could have been gold to seed the brew, so it has some real gold in it. Hard to say, but really interesting. And then they also did find elixirs of various natures down there. So the scientists carted off to go investigate. But we saw on the bookshelf they had one that was the elixir of eternal youth and that sort of thing. So a lot of the glass bottles broke, and the glass bottles that didn't break, they carted off for in the name of science. But there's still some interesting trinkets in there and artifacts. So kind of a neat show.
Thank you for joining us on this evening's edition of the Bohemican Podcast and the Alchemists in Prague during the golden age of alchemy in Bohemia. We'll be back with the third part of the edition next time. Thanks for watching.